incredible 324 pounds. He is the Hulk.
Howie, that's in honor of joining us on the 22nd, Michael St. John, the voice behind the Hulk.
Yeah, looking forward to that show.
Next
a local
Saturday
guy,
night.
actually a local guy from over in Arab, has a radio station now.
Yep, I told him we would talk a little Knights football also.
Good deal. So let's get the show started off real good. We're beyond the booth here with me and Randy. You can tell her the other guy, Jeremy Johnson, is special assignment tonight.
It's still real to me. Beyond
That's
the booth on Monday night.
That's right. It's been a long week, man. It's still real to me. Wrestling show.
But Beyond the Booth has got Coach Benefield, Logan Anderson, Phil, you and me on Monday night.
Yep, absolutely. Jeremy Johnson's not here with us tonight. He's on special assignment. He'll be back with us hopefully next week. But tonight we will be talking about Mr. 4 guys in one, Mr. Mick Foley, and the king of the hardcore legend.
Man, I'm looking forward to this. I downloaded a bunch of pictures, and one of the things that got me thinking was, what's my favorite era of Mick Foley? And I mean, it really is a different era of Mick Foley according to where he's at in his career,
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get too far into it, the one main question I've got for you is, he was Cactus Jack, he was Dude Love, he was Mankind, he was Mick Foley, he was Zodiac #2 at one time. So my main question to you is, has there ever been someone more popular or famous that had so many different gimmicks and got them all over like Mick Foley has?
And I think he kept it just enough in reality that after he went from Mankind to Dude Love, we kind of all just accepted it was all forms of Mick Foley. I'll be real honest with you. Cactus Jack was kind of its own thing and wasn't just a little while. So when he broke from Cactus Jack to Mankind, I thought those characters were real similar,
Yeah.
Really, I could see Cactus Jack, I could see him in Mankind. Then to Dude Love, and then the 4 Faces of Mrs. Foley's Baby Boy. That was direct break away from what he had done.
Yeah. So back to my question. Do you know of anyone that has put over as many different gimmicks or people or names as he has?
One person, Don Fargo. And Don Fargo in the 50s, 60s, and 70s probably put over 20 different characters at different places. It was like every territory he went to was different. Foley done it on a national level, and I don't know that anybody's ever done it on a national level.
Right, yeah. I mean, he started out with Cactus Jack back in WCW days, and I remember seeing him. I've got a picture somewhere of him diving through the ropes at the back then it was called the Rainsville Civic Center. They were there. He came diving out through the ropes there toward me, and I got a great action shot of him. It's somewhere, but started off with Cactus Jack, and then went to Mankind, Dude Love, Mick Foley. They got another listed on here I didn't even know about, Manson
the Mutilator, which was an early form of Mankind.
And then, of course, he was Zodiac #2, coming to us or billed at 6'4", 287. He'd probably love to see that 287 these days. He's topping over 300 these days, 320, somewhere in there. But, it didn't matter who he was or what he was. Everybody loved him.
I thought your question was going to be, which character did you prefer? And I think anybody that's been around me much would know by far. It is Cactus Jack. I thought Cactus Jack was just. The rest of it was great entertainment, but Cactus Jack was just insanity. I also realized he couldn't do Cactus Jack at 35 years old either. So,
Oh no, he when he was Cactus Jack, he was the king of the hardcore wrestling. Everybody's known, or anybody that's a wrestling fan, true wrestling fan, has saw him jumping off his house onto tables and everything else, and that's kind of what got him started into the business. And he just once he got in there, he made a name for himself. And whether he was a good guy, bad guy, in between guy, everyone loved Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, Dude Love, especially the Dude Love character. A lot of people, or most everybody, did love the Dude Love character. But we're going to talk about Mrs. Foley, Baby Boy, tonight. And when he wanted to wrestle, he could go. But then when he wanted to put on some entertainment as far as joking around, he could do that as well.
yeah, absolutely. And, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about a degree in English from a very prestigious university, private school, educated. Father was an educator. When played college lacrosse. I don't think no one in Mick Foley's circle generally grows up to be a pro wrestler. But as he was in college, he was going down to Pittsburgh to train, sleeping in a car, training in the gym with Dominic DiNucci. And he just was one of those guys that was determined to be a pro wrestler. He had most famously went and seen Snuka fly off the top of the cage. And I found it so ironic that he fell in love with that moment. And then his defining moment as a pro wrestler might be him off the top of Hell in a Cell. So, well, I'm sure we'll get to.
Not just once, but twice that night.
Yeah, I think one of them was an accident. To this day, I believe that.
It was either him or I saw an interview with either him or Taker One, where they said that they wasn't expecting that to open up at the top there and him go down to the ring like that. But hey, it made it so much better too.
And then we can't forget King of the Death Match and IWA Japan, where he famously beat Terry Funk and Terry Gordy in the same night in death matches, and Masawa. I'm sorry if I forget his name, but anyway, he was like the Japanese Terry Funk. I love Mankind because after Terry Gordy had his accident, a lot of people didn't want to work with him, didn't want to be around him. Mick Foley was one of the guys that worked him. Even was in a little faction with him there with Paul Bearer, Mick Foley, and Terry Gordy under the hood as the the executioner. So shout out to Mick Foley for loving Terry Gordy, who we all know how I feel about Terry Gordy, and feel like Mick Foley done his best to take care of him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's some of the things that actually happened to him as far as him wrestling. No telling how many different types of bones he's broke. He lost part of his ear, the upper part of his ear there, in a match in Japan, I think it was.
It was actually in Germany, and it was him and Vader, and it's a bump that he had done many times. It was one of his signature bumps back in the WCW, where he'd go through and get his head tied into the top rope and the bottom rope. And but that night, being in Germany, those guys didn't outfit the ring. Those ropes were strung way too tight, and we lucky that Mick Foley didn't die that night.
The ear thing, kind of like what we talked about a few minutes ago on the big Hell in the Cell cage there. He went through there and he lost one of his tooth, but he also bit a hole in his lip there. And that was, you could see the tooth coming. No, the tooth was coming out of the nose, but yet you can see the tongue coming out of the hole in his lip there.
Yeah. And that match is so defined with him. I almost feel bad talking about that match, Howie. And I know we have to, but when he was back at Ward Melvin High School, him and his brother Johnny and his friends, they loved the WWF, and he was out playing as Dude Love back then. And it's much, he was a big kid playing wrestling. But then when he got in wrestling, we saw him willing to do almost anything to make it. And Dominic DiNucci, his trainer, at the same time, in the same school, was a young Shane Douglas. I don't think Mick Foley ever had easy training to be brought in this business. So have you read his book, Have a Nice Day?
No, I have not, no.
So there's a story in that where he's not telling anybody that he's training for wrestling. And he would go down to Pittsburgh on the weekend, and he kept showing up with random black eyes and random this, random that. And said his roommates just finally figured it out that, he was still going to college, but he was spending all of his time trying to become a pro wrestler. It was a real good story about him, man. Finishing college because his parents insisted it, but also at the same time driving hundreds of miles just to get in a rep. And I've seen some if anybody's haven't watched it, go to YouTube, check out the Foley biographies. There's some old film of him and Shane Douglas still in Dominic DiNucci school trying to work, and it's rough. So definitely worth watching.
The cage match we're talking about, the Hell in a Cell, not only did he jump off of it, but he also went through the cage, through the top, landed on the ring. They had all sorts of stuff in there. After it's over with, they helped him back out. But then later on that night, beyond WWE's control, his poster went back out there, and they told him not to. But he went back out there to do his other spot as well that night with I can't remember who it was for, but he ended up going back out there after all this match and everything. And he said, "Hey, this is what I live for. This is what I want to do." So he went ahead and went back out there, even though he barely could walk, but he made it back out.
I hear wrestling through Jim Ross, and all I can hear when you talk about that match is, "My God, they broke him in half." Yeah. I hear that. I hear Jim Ross every time I see him. But I'm sure we'll get to it. Now we'll talk about the path from the early indie shows. Started out in Texas, out there in the GWF, kind of made a name for himself out there. From there, he got a WCW contract, $100,000 a year guaranteed. And he just basically walked away from it. Yeah. Just because I think he was so. I think he suffered the Eric Bischoff. He was so ingrained. Eric Bischoff thought he was going to be this guy, and that's who he's going to be. The funny thing about it is I still love the only time while he was out in GWF and World Class, he was built from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, But just a little side note for everybody, he was also named Cactus Jack Manson. So, little homage there to Charles Manson. Kind of had that name hung on him before he went to WCW, where he became Cactus Jack.
Yeah, he was. You know, I'm looking at it here now on Wikipedia, and they got him billed from Bloomington, Indiana. The Boiler Room at one time.
I think
Long Island, New York.
That's as Mrs. Foley, baby's boy.
As Mick Foley, yep. And then the Truth or Consequences in New Mexico as Cactus Jack / Dude Love. And,
well, the first time I saw him was in Memphis, the old Memphis CWA. Before he even went to Texas, he had a run there with Gorgeous Gary Young and Cactus Jack as a tag team. I remember fondly Gary Young, Cactus Jack versus Jeff Jarrett and Bill Dundee. And that kind of went around the territory. He didn't stay there very long before he was bound for Texas. But I just, maybe we should do a show one day on how many people went through Memphis that ended up famous.
That'd have to be a mini-series, man.
Man, everybody.
Couldn't be one show. It'd have to be a mini-series because
famously on the internet, you can find him jobbing for the WWE around the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he had he started out according to Wikipedia here, the early career started. His debut was in 1986, June 23rd, 1986. 86 through 89, he kind of jumped around everywhere, kind of like what you was talking about. Even a cup of coffee there at WWF, TV tapings, primetime wrestling, some of that stuff like that. And then back in 1989, 1990, that's when he kind of made his name as Cactus Jack in WCW.
Yep.
That's he was one of the mainstays there especially on Saturday night's show. You could count. He was one of the two that you could count on, maybe three that you could see every Saturday night on WCW. It wasn't main event Saturday night. What was it? It was WCW Saturday night.
I think it was Saturday night.
Just Saturday night, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, he also in that period, Howie, I always like to talk. He also had that WCCW run, maybe the last bastion after the Freebirds are gone. He's brought in opposite a lot of the Von Erichs, just really put the Von Erichs over like late 88, early 87. He didn't look like the Von Erichs, but he might have been the last heel to come through there, and then went on to go global when WCCW closed, and just a cup of coffee and global. And then, it was kind of a meteoric rise. Memphis, Indies in Northeast, WCCW, global, and then WCW. And as much as people hated WCW back then, you were a household name in WCW back then.
Yeah, it's saying on here, I was surprised to read this. It's saying that he also had a brief period with Alabama's Continental Wrestling Federation.
Yep, he did.
And then he went to WCW, and then he had a conversation with Ole Anderson about Ole didn't like his style. And let's be honest about it. Mick Foley was before his time. He was doing a lot of stuff that people hadn't even really thought about back in those days.
Yeah,
there you see the picture of it. And Ole Anderson's kind of old school type ways, and he critiqued it. And Mick Foley said, "It's time for me to move on." And so he left there and went to the independent circuit, hit around at different places, but he also landed in All Japan Pro Wrestling in 1991. And that kind of really kick-started his career right there.
I think what he did was, if you want to go back and look at it, you know, his moves, back in that period of all the moves was the elbow off the ring on the concrete. It was ridiculous. He quit the WCW and bet on himself. How many people do that these days? He was there in the WCW. He was probably mid-card.
Yeah.
Him and I threw up a picture. Him and Man Mountain was a tag team. Him and Kevin Sullivan was a tag team for a short period of time. Had that distinctive look to him back then. You know, full-blown Cactus Jack. This gets into ECW, but kind of bet on himself by going, you know, and at first when he went to Japan, they didn't want to book him over there. He had to go to some of the crummy promotions over there. You know, got to remember, he was at IWA. Terry Gordy had his drug overdose and was kind of on the outs in Japan. Terry Funk was still Terry Funk. But Mick Foley Gordy and Funk put him over in one night. I mean, I always think about that like I do Chris Jericho. I think what made Chris Jericho was being put over by The Rock and Stone Cold in one night. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're Mick Foley, your night was Terry Gordy and Terry Funk put you over in a night. And I used to get those magazines, you know, and those trading tapes and stuff, and it was gory. And I remember looking at, I always heard Cactus Jack talk about, you know, he did it for his family because he was married, had kids already, you know, how he did this, he did that for his family. But there was a look in that man's eye of satisfaction. I mean, I actually seen that. I had this old VCR tape of the death match thing, and there was a look in his eye that wasn't natural. He was happy.
Yeah.
He was happy.
He came from a different breed for sure, and it seemed like the more pain he had, the happier he was.
Yeah, and he was a turd in a punch bowl in the WCW at that point.
Yeah.
He didn't fit. But again, neither did Mark Callis,
right?
Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H. They just didn't fit. But the other guys, there was Vince McMahon waiting on the other side of Stone Cold. They were Triple H. There was Vince McMahon waiting on the other side. Mick Foley, there was no WWE because Vince McMahon thought he was disgusting, you know. So Japan, and then we got to talk about it. Paul Heyman bet on Mick Foley, and that was pure genius.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a second. You know, after he left Japan, you know, from 1991 when he was independent circuit in All Japan Pro Wrestling, he went back to WCW from 91 to 94, and that's the period that you was just talking about as far as all those guys that was there and ended up leaving. And the big thing was the last feud that he had in WCW was against Big Van Vader in 93, 94. Tore the house down on several shows, pay-per-views. You know, that was back in 93, 94, kind of starting now WWE was doing, or WWF at the time was doing pay-per-views, but it wasn't on a monthly basis. But during this 93, 94 is when it started becoming a monthly pay-per-view thing. And that feud with Cactus Jack and Big Van Vader was the thing back in 93, 94 era.
Yeah. And right before that was a feud with Kevin Sullivan. You know, he's a guy that you could put against. And a lot of those feuds were heel versus heel. But they would be so physical. The one with Sullivan was before was kind of strange. It was like he abused Mick Foley, you know. And then the feud with Van Vader was, I mean, look at Vader. Leon White was a 6'6", 400-pound who had been just over in Japan. Unfortunately, Shawn Michaels done the number on Van Vader in WWE. But before that, Van Vader was the biggest star in Japan. He went to WCW. They put him with Harley Race. It was, I mean, Mick Foley, Cactus Jack was there, and he worked with Sting too. Him and Sting had some great matches. You know,
Yeah.
He could play that, and Mick could take loss after loss after loss, and it never hurt him.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then if you were when he was there, there's a famous incident in Chattanooga where he's inside the steel cage with Abdullah the Butcher, and they execute Abdullah the Butcher, and the Steiners are involved, and it's a Halloween Havoc. And it might be one of the low moments of WCW when they put Abdullah the Butcher in an electric chair and pretend to kill him.
Yeah, you know, his departure back in '94 ended up being where he turned on Sullivan. They were partners, tag team partners there for a while, tag team champs. They lost the belts. He turned on Sullivan, and his final match was a Fall Brawl '94 War Games. Let's see, War Games in September '94, losing to Sullivan in a loser leaves WCW match, in which I'm sure that Mick Foley was tickled to death to get out of there at that time.
I think he had told them they was leaving, and they turned the stipulation that for a reason. And then you had a reason for Cactus Jack to leave. Unfortunately, let me just tell you, in my opinion, Cactus Jack had a huge underground. I mean, I was around. I'd done left the WCW, but Cactus Jack was one of my favorite wrestlers at this period. You know, and it was, you could tell he was hated by the establishment, you know. And if you watched, you've seen things from Mick Foley you never seen before. And even Ric Flair would tell you that nobody was crazier than Mick Foley in that day.
And Mick Foley was such a fan favorite, like I talked about earlier. But the reason he is a fan favorite was he wasn't built like a bodybuilder. He looked like the average Joe that came out there with the long hair and the off the wall. I don't want to call it Tourette's, but just the little ticks as far as bang bang all the time. So, but when he left WCW, he went to Smoky Mountain Wrestling in '94, which they had some pretty big name stars there at that time as well.
Yeah, you know, you got to think Jake's coming through, Terry Gordy's coming through, Mick Foley comes through. Jim Cornette would work it like a territory. He would bring you in, and he would keep you there for a while. We have to remember, though, that Mick's from Long Island, and ECW just fit where he was going at that point in his career. And just think, you know, while he gave up $100,000 a year, he really did put himself in a situation to make millions a year.
Yeah, he didn't stay very long at the Smoky Mountain Wrestling, where he ended up going to the Eastern Championship Wrestling / ECW Extreme Championship Wrestling '94 through '96, and he's made his debut against none other than Sabu.
Yeah,
and you're talking about a match that is way before its time. It was, but man, it was such a good match.
Man, so Mick Foley was loved by that ECW arena, and we'll talk about it in just a minute. But ultimately, he was loved because he could deliver what ECW loved, which was a different violence, a different level of intensity. You also look at ECW; they had the Dudleys, Raven, um, Mick Foley. There was a lot of talent in ECW, and of course, Shane Douglas. Um,
Sandman.
But and this is '95, and he's just lost his ear in '94, and then he goes and bets on himself. Man, there's nothing. I hate to keep saying that, Howie, but he truly bet on himself.
Yeah, he did. Like I said, you don't see that very much anymore. You really can't no more because you don't have the territories no more. You can't go from place to place to place to tune in your craft or get better at it and all that. You're pretty much, you got 3 places to go right now. With TNA, WWE, and AEW.
Yeah.
And no disrespect as far as for Ring of Honor, but it's basically AEW as well.
Well, and if you're willing to live in Japan, there's a nice living to be made there too. But you got to remember, he's got to live in Japan. You got to live in Japan.
Yeah.
Year round.
Yeah. So he had some great matches in the ECW arena there. He had a barbed wire match, hoodies and choke slams, all sorts of stuff against the Sandman. He had Terry Funk came in there for a while. He had matches with him. He had matches with Taz, I think, at that time. So many different people, And if you go back and watch some of the ECW stuff, you'll be surprised at a lot of the people that came out of ECW that ended up being, I shouldn't say ended up being, but were really good wrestlers back then as well.
Yeah, and there's an interesting part of this too. Foley wanted in the WWE. He grew up as a WWE guy, and people inside of wrestling understood the real money was in the WWE. I didn't understand that as a kid watching it, but I mean, there was a different level of money. He called the WWE every year. He said he'd call once a year, and they would say, no, we're not interested. But he had a real big proponent on the inside of the WWF then, and that was Jim Ross. But I think ultimately what he did, though, was in ECW, was when he turned heel and became anti-violence, anti-ECW, shaved his beard, cut maybe the greatest promo you've ever heard, which, of course, is the Kane Dewey promo where the fan had, with Mick Foley's permission, had brought a sign that said Kane Dewey. I think he changed his image with a lot of people by those promos, Howie.
Yeah, he did. And, people saw a different side of him at that time because anybody that ever saw a Mick Foley match or a Cactus Jack match, there was always some type of violence going on.
Absolutely.
And when he went that anti stuff, it would be, in today's world, it would be kind of like saying, all right, Stone Cold Steve Austin comes out there, but yeah, he don't say any cuss words.
Yeah, he's going to wear a suit and tie and drink sweet tea.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, that was a different side of Mick Foley, and he was showing everyone that he can do more than just the Cactus Jack character at that time, because all these others hadn't rolled around yet. That didn't happen until he went to WWF. But when he left ECW, he ended up in the International Wrestling Association of Japan for 95, 96.
Death match.
Do what?
That's the deathmatch king.
Yeah. So, he ended up there for a while, and as Cactus Jack is, of course, because these other personas, let me say, didn't come around till later on. But when he's in Japan, he teamed with a lot of Americans over there as well, like Tracy Smothers, the wild-eyed Southern boy, Tracy Smothers.
He was as Mick Foley.
Huh?
He is crazy as Mick Foley.
Yeah. You got the Headhunters that was over there as well. There's quite a bit of, people over there. But, being over there, he kind of honed in his craft to make it better, to get the attention of Vince McMahon at the time. But he didn't really get the full attention until, like you said, he had an inside source there with one Mr. Jim Ross that basically put his job on the line to get an interview with Mick Foley at that time.
So in this thing I've been watching today, just get to know Mick Foley better, he talks about Jim Ross, and Jim Ross talks about, they went to McMahon, and McMahon called him disgusting. That's how much he didn't like Mick Foley. And Jim, and God, on TV right now is the famous Terry Funk incident where they scream at the crowd to get them chairs and they bury them under the chairs. Another classic ECW moment. But Vince McMahon told Jim Ross, go ahead and sign him. Everybody needs to have their heart broken by a talent at one point. And I really believe that he didn't think Vince McMahon didn't think Mick Foley would make it.
Yeah, on this right here that I'm looking at, enhancement talent.
Yeah.
But apparently McMahon didn't like Foley's face. Back then, most of McMahon's wrestlers were nice looking guys, and I've said this about Eddie Kingston, and I've said about Mick Foley. He looks like he could be on our set right here joining us. And so he didn't want his face to be seen, so that became the Mankind area with the mask.
First name of that character was Mason the Mutilator. And part of the reason was if you remember the first outfit, it was, except for his arms, every inch of his body was covered up.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't hear him talk about this today or in all the shows I listened to. I think there was I don't know that Mick Foley makes it in the WWE without Mankind. Because, without The Undertaker. Because The Undertaker needed opponents. And how many pay-per-views, how many different angles. They basically kept the Undertaker going through Kane or Mankind for about a half a decade.
Right.
Boiler Room Brawls, Buried Alive, Hell in a Cell. I mean, I would like to go back, and I did research. I started to today. How many pay-per-views were the Undertaker and Mankind? I can think of 7 or 8 just sitting here.
Yeah.
The Boiler Room Brawl, I thought, was one that's just way underrated. So creepy, and it's kind of set the level for the vignette, like the AJ Styles versus the Undertaker film matches later on.
Right. Yeah, the Mankind character was built from the boiler rooms because they were saying that he lived in the boiler rooms of all the buildings that they were in, and that's why they had the boiler room match, kind of give them a little bit of a home field advantage because that's where he always stayed at and everything. And his catchphrase was "Have a nice day."
Yep.
Here he is. He's portrayed as a mentally deranged person, and at the end of it, his little, I don't want to call it Tourette's, but his little thing, you know, kind of like when he's Cactus Jack doing the bang bang with Mankind, it was have a nice day. With him having that button-up shirt on that had the sleeves cut off of it, with I think it was sweatpants, black sweatpants, and he had at the first he had a tie on there that was half cut in two, I think.
Corporate Mankind. Somehow Vince McMahon brought him into the Stone Cold feud, and he wins the world. You know, this is when he goes through his 2 title runs too. The most famous of those was Eric Bischoff gets on TV and says, "Don't flip it over to the WWF." Mankind wins the WWF World Title. Well, I'm sitting at home and I immediately flip. I remember watching it, thinking, "Oh my God, Mankind's going to become world champion." I'm flipping over. That's going to be too cool not to see.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he loses it to Rock. But there's a run there of the Mankind character kind of remaking himself into a baby face, wrestling in sweatpants, which evidently, according to Triple H, he never washed. He would come out of the ring, take a shower, wash those same sweatpants, and get back on the road. Notoriously cheap guy. He said the only person he wouldn't he wouldn't share a hotel room with ever again was Vader. And he tells a story about getting in the room with Vader and they go to sleep, and Vader evidently snores louder than anybody's ever heard. And he was like, by the end of the night, down in the lobby, sleeping in the lobby. But you also, the SpaghettiO commercials come. All of a sudden, Mick Foley has become a very markable character. And as much as we both love Ron the Truth Killings, you see a bit of comedy come out of Mick Foley at this point.
Yeah, we'll get to it here in a few minutes. The comedy part that I love so much, but he, even though that he was with corporate McMahon and all this, supposed to be the bad guy, but when he came out by himself, you still heard a lot of cheers.
Yeah.
But now when he came out with McMahon, of course, you heard the boos.
Yeah.
But it wasn't because of Mankind. It was because of McMahon. Because, I mean, regardless of what it was, and, I'm going to reiterate this several more times, the fans loved him because he was the average Joe person.
Yeah.
He wasn't a tan bodybuilder from Venice Beach, California, or wherever it was. He looked like the average Joe, and everybody could relate to him because he wasn't built. He looked like the common man, and they loved him. And and then after a while, like I said, he went to corporate Mankind. But then all of a sudden, here comes our friend from the '70s, Mr. Dude Love.
Have mercy.
And he played it so well. He did it so well, and he came out there as Dude Love, and even at one of the I think it was one of the Royal Rumbles, he did all 3 of the characters. One of them got thrown out. I wish I could remember which order it was, but like Mankind got thrown out, then he re-entered as Dude Love, and Dude Love got thrown out. Then here comes he is never Cactus Jack in WWF, but
he wrestled Triple H, and that's the famous. They brought Dude Love on one side, the jumbotron, Mankind on the other side, and they bring Cactus Jack out for that one night with Triple H.
Okay. So he did come out as Cactus Jack that night.
On Cactus Jack.
And he came out and he got thrown out as well. And, one of the big interviews afterwards was, well, did you get paid for all 3 characters? And he's like, no, I got paid. I did 3 jobs, but only got paid for the one, So, great, and what was a little strange, or not strange, but unique about it was, even though he was different personas, he did wrestle a little bit different with each one of them.
Yeah. I was just thinking we needed to cover Mankind, mandible claw, something we don't see every day. The ripping of the hair. You remember he had really tore his own hair out.
Yeah.
So he was bald on that side. He did some things that you didn't see every day. The flying off the ring onto the concrete, and he kept that up. I think the WWE, if the story is straight, Vince McMahon had saw it a couple of times and told him never to do it again. But the interviews as Mankind were just off the hook, Howie.
Yeah, it was.
So, and also going back to that Cactus, that Triple H gave him his choice to finish his career as Mankind or Cactus Jack, and he chose Mankind. So, he said that Cactus Jack kind of had played its role out before he came, and he finished his career as Mankind. And I'm watching The Undertaker right now up on the screen, talking about all the crazy, bumping machine. And again, I never met Mick Foley, don't know Mick Foley, but I hear these stories where you could touch his arm, and I heard it was like touching a marshmallow. He was just this big pile of goo and just built to make bumps.
It's probably, you're talking about him jumping off the ring apron onto the concrete and everything. That is why he had to have a hip replacement surgery.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you see him walk now, everybody knows, most people that does listen to River City, I've had reconstruction, and I kind of got a waddle, a Mick Foley waddle when I walk. And a lot of it's just the amount of surgeries after a while to your hips. You lose that stability of your mid body, Howie. And when you watch Mick Foley walk, he's just not very stable in that mid body. I'm not very stable. I'm not making fun of the man. Don't think that. It's just, I kind of understand where he comes from.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth when you said, when you watch him walk, he don't really walk, he waddles.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do the same sometimes.
Yes.
When I'm really hurting, and I've got 2 rebuilt hips, 2 rebuilt knees, a rebuilt back, and you're not very stable, and you think about a kid walking, the first thing a kid does is kind of waddle. Right. And really you cut the main thing is, if you look at someone like Foley or myself that kind of don't walk normal, you'll see that we stride real conservative. And that's what gives it the kind of the waddle look, And I'm very proud of my waddle because I went through a lot to have it. But
you got the penguin walk.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the penguin, and it's just become that for Mick Foley. It's become live. I'm so glad Mick got out when he did, though. He wasn't going to make it much longer.
No, absolutely not. Let's move on. We're getting kind of long in here, but this is my favorite part of Mick Foley. I loved him as Cactus Jack. Don't get me wrong. You never knew what he's going to do when he was wrestling as Cactus Jack. But here from 98 to 2000, we talked about the comedy side. Here's the rock and sock connection.
And
it was great. This is when the rock, this is when Mankind, was it Mankind or was he Mick Foley at this time?
Mankind.
It's still Mankind, wasn't he?
Yeah, they really didn't. It wasn't until the last little bit that they started calling him Mick Foley.
Yeah. But anyway, he did This Is Your Life on a Raw one night for The Rock and brought out an old girlfriend, an old teacher, an old coach. To me, to this day, that's the best segment. Let me get this straight. The best comedy segment of wrestling there ever was, in my opinion.
And it's funny, I was going to bring up the night he went and visit Vince McMahon in the hospital, and he brought out Bubbles the Clown.
That was good too. Don't get me wrong. That was good too. But for me, it was just his reactions to what The Rock would tell each one of them, and try to get The Rock's reaction and all that. It just, to me, it was one of the best comedy sections that there ever was.
And he's approaching 40 now. Mick's a little older than we are. So in 2000, he's approaching 40. Just like, I think if you can see it there, I think his birthday's 62 or 3 maybe.
Let's see. He's 59 at the moment.
Okay, so I'm 57. So I was born in 66. So 64-ish.
65. June 7th to 65. So let's see. He just had a birthday.
Yep. And so he's a year and a half older than me. By 2000, he's, 35, 36 years old, but he's not lived the life of a 35 or 36-year-old man. And we've thought there is so many moments we've not mentioned. The interview with Jim Ross, the videotape of him diving off. We could have done 2 hours on Mick Foley, going to the Madison Square Garden. His lovely, just beautiful wife, Nicolette. Just beautiful. His kids, his daughter, his many books.
Wow.
If anybody came out of wrestling at the right time and with the health remaining, it was Mick Foley.
Like you said, here he is at 30 to 35 in that age range, but he had a body of a 60-year-old, possibly even a 65-year-old, because of all the bumps, the tables, the concretes, everything he's went through and on and to. You're right. He got out just at the right time, but he still stuck around to be a figure on there because he ended up being a commissioner for a while, a general manager, and you got to love it when he would come out there to get the world's cheapest pop by starting his interview off by saying, from right here in Birmingham, Alabama. And of course, if you're ever at a live show, if your hometown is mentioned, everybody goes nuts.
Yeah, and I'm going through some pictures. And just look at that one. I think that's my favorite,
Yeah.
And that's the night he won the WWE Championship. Of course, this is when his career is winding down. Cover of 2K14 back in IWA. But here's the Mick Foley I like to remember.
Yeah.
So I can close this show out tonight for me, Howie, with one statement, and it came from Mick Foley himself. A man who fell off of cages, fell on explosives, wrestled in barbed wire with baseball bats and steel chairs, made more money with a sock puppet than he ever did all the rest. That mankind, at the end of his career, wasn't capable of the Dave Meltzer 5-star match, but he was still capable of entertaining. I love that Mick Foley. It's the Cactus Jack, in his prime, and then it's that last couple of years of Mick Foley with the sock that I love. I just
give him some credit, Randy. Go ahead and give the sock some credit. His name is Socko, Mr. Socko.
Mr. Socko, and I love that. I love Dude Love, and I love he was able to take care of his family in that last 5 years. And now that I look back, can you remember before the Rock and Sock, it was him and Stone Cold that tagged together, and Stone Cold's in the ring, and Mick Foley makes this heartfelt appeal while Stone Cold and Mick Foley or Dude Love should tag together in a comic genius.
Yep.
And you know what? He took Dude Love as serious as he did Mankind.
He did. He did. You know, I it's one of these things that I wish I'd come up with better wording, but regardless of who he was, Cactus Jack, Mankind, Mick Foley, Dude Love, everybody loved him. You know, he was just loved by everybody because he was the. I hate to say it was as far as with no disrespect for Dusty Rhodes, but he was the common man.
He was, and I know he's still alive. Well, we know Mick Foley's still alive, but I used to watching Dude Love. I used to think he needs to send Jimmy Valiant a paycheck because it felt like Dude Love was a comic Jimmy Valiant. The Jimmy Valiant we grew up, the doo-wah-diddy, the boy from New York City, Jimmy Valiant, you know, and it just warmed my heart. And again, I love to see people get out of life ahead. And this, 1997 was the night he wrestled as Cactus Jack against Triple H.
You know, real quick, you know, you're talking about Jimmy Valiant. He looked like he could have been an offspring of Jimmy Valiant being Dude Love.
He did. He did. He reminded me of Jimmy Valiant in Memphis. Dude Love reminded me of the deranged Terry Funk.
Right.
Mankind reminded me so much of those characters like the Sheik and, you know, the stuff. Mick Foley loves wrestling. He didn't just create all this. He reinvented a lot of it. So I did this podcast in a pair of sweatpants, and we've talked about it. I've done it before on here. I got no teeth, and I spit them out here. If I had one dream in life, it would be to come out like Mick Foley did. You know, just be okay for all the bumps and all the stuff that we did to ourselves. We're okay, and that's my dream, is to be Mick Foley and then maybe the ending of my life.
You know the Mankind with the mask on. I loved it there halfway through his Mankind run where he came out with the Mankind, the big old yellow happy face, smiley face, but he had the Mankind mask on. You know, that was, you know, Mick Foley's one of a kind. He don't get as much credit as he really, as he really deserves, because he put a lot of smiles on a lot of young kids' faces with everything that he done, but he put a lot of grimaces on older people like me and you on our faces by watching some of the things that he did wrestling.
Yeah, and you know, if you've not seen the movie Beyond the Mat, it was there the night that he came off the cage with the Undertaker, and you just see him talking to his wife later, and he's just not good. You know, he's not. He's not good. And then you see him. You remember when he cut his hair and shaved his beard under the Mankind mat, and put on the suit for Vince McMahon and then Vince McMahon turned on him,
Right.
And it became a Shawn Michaels thing. Mick Foley was a genius at taking whatever you gave him, whatever they gave him, he got the very most out of it. And again, Mick Foley's not my favorite wrestler, but I love Mick Foley. It's kind of funny. I love Mick Foley's career more than I do any moment of Mick Foley, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he way before his time on some of this stuff. You know, there was rumors there that he was going to lose some weight and come back for one last match, but I think he finally kind of nixed that, and I think that's a good idea because of his health reasons. I mean, he barely can. We stated it earlier, barely can get around as it is right now. Let's remember Mick Foley the way he was when he was able to wrestle and be able to get around, you know.
I want Mick Foley to be Santa Claus now. That's perfect.
Don't he have a Christmas book out?
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, if you've not read his books, I'm going to tell you, Have a Nice Day is one of my favorite all time. And I'm not a big reader, but I read every word of Have a Nice Day twice. And it's one of my favorite books. And if I was Al Snow, Al Snow was his friend that they like to pick on. And the funniest wrestling story is in Have a Nice Day when he talks about picking Al Snow up for a suplex and exposing him in mid-ring. And it's just absolutely hilarious. So
Right.
Mick Foley had a good time as a pro wrestler. Mick Foley's a great dad. Mick Foley's a good man. So maybe that's what I should say. I like Mick Foley the man more than Mick Foley the pro wrestler.
Right, absolutely. Randy's been a great show. We're at the hour mark.
Jeremy, we'll see you soon.
Yes, sir. Jeremy's on special assignment for us tonight. Hopefully he'll be able to get back with us next week and join us next week. When I don't know what we'll talk about, but we will be back on here talking about some type of wrestling for sure. But on the 22nd, we got who we got? Michael St. John.
Michael St. John from CWA Memphis Championship Wrestling, who has. I'm going to give you something to watch ahead of this show. Michael St. John, Dutch Mantell argue over who's going to be the color commentator on CWA. It is one of the funniest pieces I've ever watched.
Good
Also,
deal.
he did the original Kamala video on Memphis Wrestling and the original Hulk show video that we showed to start tonight.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. So stay around for that. Beyond the Booth is Monday night. I have the DeKalb County Sports Hall of Fame inductee, Coach Paul Benefield, along with his star running back, 4-star running back, linebacker, Logan Anderson's going to be on here.
Be on there with us to talk to Coach Benefield, right?
Yeah, if y'all want me to, and Coach Benefield wants me to, I'll be on there. That's not a problem.
You and Coach Benefield share a great friendship.
Yeah, it's unique. I'll tell you that much. You know, Coach Benefield, I've known Coach Benefield for a long time, and it's kind of odd. It's out of the blue, and if things are not going exactly right or whatever, sometimes out of the blue, I'll get a text from him, and he's usually talking about something that happened in the past, and it kind of brings back a little bit good memories from time to time. So, but you know, we've done a few things together, hung out together over in Atlanta at the Falcons games and stuff like that, and so it's always good to be able to talk with Coach Benefield and catch up with him. But anyway, join us Monday night for Beyond the Booth at 6:00 with those two guys on there. And then we will be back next Thursday, hopefully Thursday or Friday one.
Saturday.
Sir?
And Saturday.
And Saturday for it's still real to me. So for Randy Cunningham, I'm Howard Channey. See you next time here on the RiverCity-Media Network.
Where you might hear Randall say good night.
Good night.